Uh, Hello everyone. I'm Jerry. I'm a graduate student from MIT Sloan School of Management. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce my research here. And today I will talk about a behavioral algorithm I developed to identify experts and improve wisdom of crowds. So suppose you are a manager and you have a group of analysts to predict the future stock price. What can you do to obtain an accurate prediction? So instead of using the individual predictions, past research suggests the aggregate estimate of a group. For example, the group mean tends to be better than the individual estimate. And this is known as the wisdom of crowds effect. And a large body of prior work has demonstrated the application value of wisdom of crowds in various important contexts, from managerial decision-making to labeling misinformation to predicting election outcomes. All of these are related to wisdom of crowds. And the big question I address is how to improve the wisdom of crowds. And the most common wisdom of crowds technique is to take the average of the group, which means everyone in the group receives an equal weight. But within a crowd, relatively speaking, some are experts and some are lay people. And if we can identify the experts, then we can further improve wisdom of crowds by giving the experts more weight in the aggregation. But identifying experts within a crowd is very difficult. 50 years of past research on overconfidence have quite robustly found that self-reported measures of expertise, such as self-reported confidence intervals or self-reported relative placement of accuracy, cannot reliably identify experts. And by the way, overconfidence is probably the most persistent human bias. And scholars have tried many different ways of eliciting confidence, trying to let people learn about their overconfidence. But at the end of the day, people still tend to exhibit overconfidence. And if you think about the famous Dunning-Kruger effect in the context of wisdom of crowds, so while experts claim they are the experts, the lay people also incorrectly claim that they are the experts. Therefore, by overweighting estimates based on those who claim they are confident or claim they are the experts, we cannot reliably improve wisdom of crowds. And because identifying experts and improving wisdom of crowds are difficult, that's why scholars like my advisor Zhang propose to rely on meta predictions combined with heavy-duty quantitative modeling to improve wisdom of crowds. However, is there a simpler and more effective solution? And today, I will introduce my reviewed expertise algorithm that does exactly that. My first main contribution is that I propose a behavioral-driven algorithm to improve the wisdom of crowds. So instead of self-reported measures, I approach the problem from a different direction. So I develop a behavioral measure based on advice taking to infer people's expertise. The high-level idea is that I ask you a question, and you give me your initial estimate to a question. Then I inform you about the average estimate of the group, and then allow you to update your initial answer. My argument, which I empirically and theoretically justify, is that the informed experts tend to update relatively less than the lay people. So by overweighting the initial answers of those who update less, we rely more on the experts' opinions and improve wisdom of crowds. And my second main contribution, which has implications to judgment and decision-making more broadly, is that I clarify the difference between what advice taking is able to reveal and what self-reported confidence is actually measuring. So these two are very different constructs. So a spoiler alert, while self-reported measures of confidence is just a measure of feeling of uncertainty based on one's available information, advice taking reveals the amount of information one has accounted for. That's why my algorithm works even when conventional self-reported confidence fails. And I will explain this part in great detail later. By the way, if you have any questions, you feel free to just jump in. And my plan for today is that I will first lay out the rational foundation for this algorithm before I formally introduce how to implement this algorithm in a wisdom of crowds context. Then I show that my method works in empirical contexts where people may exhibit biased advice taking. And at some point during the talk, I suppose someone will ask, like, what if lay people are stubborn? What if they do not update? And don't worry, I will discuss this extensively. Then, and very importantly, I will clarify why my method works even when conventional self-reported measures of expertise fails. And finally, I want to discuss how my algorithm compares with existing methods and some ongoing work to further improve my own algorithm. And because the algorithm is about advice taking, let me very quickly deliver the intuition behind people's advice taking using a simple or standard Bayesian updating model. So first, there's a question of interest, and we will be providing advice to agents after they provide their initial answer. So since everyone will be given the same group average Y bar as a piece of advice, we assume agents have a common belief of the quality of the advice. Here, sigma squared is just a perceived prior variance of the advice. And it doesn't vary across agents, so it's common signal. And then the second assumption of the model is that agents have IID prior belief of the state of the nature, and theta hat are people's respective initial estimate. And the prior variance is captured by sigma squared divided by kappa I, of which kappa I captures how precise one's initial belief is relative to the advice. So for example, everyone here provides their initial estimate to a question. Then I inform people about the group average. And some of you might think, some of them might think their initial estimate is more precise than others relative to the group mean. So given the setup, if people engage in Bayesian updating, then the updated estimate is characterized as a weighted average between the initial estimate theta hat and the advice Y bar, with the weight on advice being inversely related to kappa I. So remember, a larger kappa I means higher precision relative to the advice, which would result in agents less updating. So therefore, if we think about the implication of the model, so we may infer who is more certain about their initial belief by only observing and comparing how much weight we put on the advice. So the important takeaway is that the weight on advice is a relative measure of expertise. So for example, you putting 10% weight on the advice in updating does not tell me whether you are an expert, but it tells me you probably have more expertise than someone who put 50% weight on the advice. So the more one updates, the less certain one is about their initial estimate. So by overweighting those who update less, we can potentially improve. We can potentially overweight the experts' initial estimates and improve the wisdom of crowds. So now I will introduce how to implement the the reviewed expertise algorithm. So okay, how does the algorithm work? So step one, we ask each agent for their initial answer X. And step two, we provide each agent a piece of a numerical advice Y, which is just a group average. Then agents provide their updated answer Z. So step four, we calculate the RE measure, which is how much people deviate from their initial answer after seeing the advice, divided by the distance between the initial answer and the advice. So basically, this is just the absolute value of the weight on advice measure derived from the previous Bayesian updating model. So basically, a larger RE measure implies larger prior uncertainty. And since we do not ask subjects to self-report their expertise, but infer it from the amount of updating or the weight on a device, we call our algorithm the reviewed expertise algorithm. And finally, to better leverage wisdom of crowds and get an aggregate estimate, we take an inverse variance weighted average over the initial answer. So if your updating or RE measure is half of mine, your weight on device is half of mine, you will be weighted twice as much than me in the aggregation, because all the algorithm requires is a relative measure of expertise. Here, and the RE measure is just the variance input in the inverse variance weighted average. Okay, now that I've introduced the algorithm, I just want to acknowledge this upfront. So of course, people are not perfectly Bayesian in reality, and they may exhibit biased advice taking. So I hereby talk about how behavioral biases affect the algorithm. And first, let me acknowledge the severity of behavioral biases is an empirical question. And in my paper, I show that even though there exist some stubborn lay people, my algorithm still works. And I also demonstrate that my algorithm works in a political context. For instance, I ask Republican, these are subject pools from the United States. So I ask Republican and Democrats to answer politicized factual belief questions. And I show that my algorithm works even in that context. And second, my study design is incentivized. So in some sense, that being stubborn is going to be costly in terms of financial return. And third, of course, if we can further identify the stubborn lay people in the algorithm in the group, my algorithm can be even better. And I also propose a method to do that and show that it also works. And second, I would also like to give you a quick overview of the literature about biased advice taking. So in the advice taking literature, scholars have often documented the egocentric bias. And the bias does not mean that people are stubborn and exhibit zero updating. Rather, it refers to that people tend to put less weight on the advice than they should. So there will be heterogeneity of advice taking for us to exploit. So remember that the RE algorithm only requires a proxy for relative expertise as an input. So if, say, both of us update less than we should, it would have little impact on the algorithm because the heterogeneity of expertise is still present for us to do the weighting in the aggregation. And nevertheless, I do want to clarify that previous results about people being stubborn. So for example, Atanasov et al. 2020, which is a project based on the Good Judgment Project, found that those who update their responses little by little as they proactively seek for information over time are more accurate than those who do not update. But this is actually not evidence against my arguments because we work in very different contexts. And their context has no advice taking. Basically, what they find is that lay people are probably too lazy to search for information on their own. But when advice is readily given, so when the advice is provided to the subjects or to the lay people, they actually update. So that's the main difference. And finally, and most importantly, in a political context where you might expect the algorithm to not work, because people's initial estimates are probably biased by their political stance, and they may not want to update. However, past literature in political psychology, including my own paper, suggests if the question is about factual beliefs, people actually update. What is really stubborn is people's preference. So research has shown that if you show Republicans that Donald Trump lied. Most Republicans do not disregard the evidence, and they actually update their beliefs about whether Trump is a liar. However, they still support Trump. And by the way, the paper is called They Might Be a Liar, but They Are My Liar. So that's the difference. So since wisdom of crowds is always about factual belief or factual questions, not who they like, not one's own preference or actions. So people are very likely to update. And next, I will show you some results using the RE algorithm. So in study 1A, we have 100 subjects from prolific to answer 20 trivia questions, and we asked for their initial estimate and self-reported confidence measures. We also show them the average from 10 other participants, which is held constant for all subjects, and allow them to update their initial answer, and the responses are scored and incentivized. Let me use one of the questions as a case study. So the question is, what is the world record auction price of a painting? And then the x-axis is subjects' initial answers. The y-axis is the RE measure, or how much people update. And the red line is the correct answer, which is $450 million. And then the green line is the group mean. And as you can see, the group mean is more accurate than many individual estimates. So the wisdom of crowds effect is present. So wisdom of crowds is not a bad method by all means. And the yellow line is the group median. And then the black line is the output of my RE algorithm, or the RE weighted mean, based on how much people update. As you can see, it's much closer to the truth than conventional wisdom of crowds methods. And furthermore, my algorithm outperforms conventional confidence weighted means. And finally, this is the blue line. The blue line is people's amount of weight on advice or amount of updating across different initial answers. So as we can see, as the initial answer gets farther away from the truth, people update increases, amount of update increases. So the red line is the truth, and as you can see, it starts to increase as it gets farther away from the truth. So this is a sign that the algorithm would perform as intended, because those who are closer to the truth update less, so they will receive more weight in the aggregation. So the more accurate initial estimates receive more weight in the aggregation. And there are two things I would like to point out here. So out of the 20 questions, RE improves, out of the 20 questions I had, RE improves upon group mean in 18 questions, and with 13 improvements being statistically significant. And here the statistical inference is done by bootstrapping. And for example, given each question, I resample with replacement the 100 subjects. And within the bootstrap sample, I calculate how much RE improves upon the group mean. And I do that 3,000 times to form a distribution of RE's improvement. And the second thing is that the RE algorithm tend to have larger improvement if the group mean has larger error. And this makes a lot of sense because sometimes wisdom of crowds is already accurate, and then there's simply no room for improvement. But even in this case, the algorithm does not tend to yield a worse performance either. So in addition, group mean having a larger error is an indicator that there exist many lay people in the group. And in this case, distinguished experts from the lay people tend to be more beneficial. So the takeaway is that the algorithm requires heterogeneity of expertise to yield significant improvement. And if there are no experts in the group, no relative experts in the group, of course, there's no one for us to identify. This is the result from the study that I asked subjects. So I recruited Democrats and Republicans from MTurk, and I asked them political factual belief questions. For example, what's the unemployment rate of the US at the end of Donald Trump's administration? Or like, what's the inflation rate of the current, under the current Joe Biden's administration? So these questions are usually considered as politicized by previous literature. And similar to study 1A, subjects provide give me their initial estimates and updated answer after seeing group mean. And then for the sake of time, I will just skip the results. Basically, the algorithm still works, even in this context where people might expect my algorithm does not work. And people basically are less stubborn than we thought. Okay. In study 2, I ask subjects to evaluate the extent to which a statement is true. So it's more like a binary context here. And using the results from study 2, I will deliver the intuition behind why this algorithm really works. So for example, one statement is English is the official language of the United States. This is a statement. And please tell me, think about like what's the probability of the statement being actually true. You don't have to tell me the answer, just think about it. What's the, oh, sorry, English is the official language of the US. Okay, then for this statement, I inform subjects that on average, 100 subjects think the statement has 54% chance of being true and 46% chance of being false. And please give me an updated answer. And as we can see from the subject's belief updating pattern, those who are initially, by the way, the correct answer is false. English is not the official language of the US. That might be a somewhat surprising answer to some of you. Because the US does not have an official language. So as we can see from subjects' belief updating pattern, those who are initially correct or their state of probability that's less than 50% tend to update less than those who are initially wrong or those who state a probability larger than 50%. This suggests the algorithm would work as intended because those who are more accurate will receive more weight in the aggregation. And in addition, many people who are confidently wrong or those who stay like 100% sure the statement is true, they actually update their beliefs after seeing the group average. And then just to examine this analytically, so pulling all 10 questions, all 10 statements in the binary study, I request the amount of updating on whether an initial answer is initially correct under binary classification, and controlling for each answer's respective confidence, as well as including questions fixed effect. The results suggest that across different level of confidence, those who are initially correct tend to update less than those who are initially wrong. And such a result is robust even if we subset on initial answers which have a high confidence. So for instance, if we run the same regression looking at the answers with initial confidence greater than 80% or 90%, and those who are initially confidently wrong are willing to update, and they update much more than those who are confidently correct. This raises an interesting question. What is advice taking actually revealing? So some of you might think that the algorithm is about revealing confidence. But if you think about it, self-reported confidence is supposed to do the same thing. So why is the amount of advice taking able to identify experts when self-reported confidence fails? So the key difference between self-reported confidence and the amount of advice taking is that self-reported confidence reflects one's feeling. It's very important. It's one's feeling of uncertainty given one's available information. Advice taking reflects the amount of information one has and has not taken into account in their initial judgment. So going back to the binary example I just gave you. So for example, in a recorded statement, English is the official language of the US. For the lay people who are confidently wrong, or those who think that, who state, they are 100% sure that English is the official language of the US. So think about those people, what they were thinking. So they might think, people speak English in the US, schools teach English in the US, right? Everybody speaks English. Yeah, everybody speaks English in the US. And given that's the information they consider, given that's what they think, they naturally conclude that they are 95% sure or 100% sure the statement is true, because it seems very intuitive, right? Everybody speaks English. Of course, it must be that way. But however, when they see the group average is only 54% true, they are surprised. They might go back and think, why do so many people seem to disagree with me? Did I miss any information initially? Because now that they have realized they might have missed something, they update to incorporate the missing information. That's why even though they are 95% sure, they still update, because the group average is somewhat surprising to them. Now let's consider the expert's decision process. They might think, okay, many people speak English in the US, but however, many signs in the United States are bilingual. You can take the driver's written test in the DMV in multiple languages. And at some point in the United States, there were more people speaking German than English in the US history. So because these people have considered much more information, and when they say they are 90% confident that statement is false, and they see the group average is 54% true, they update less than the lay people who have considered little information, because they can somewhat, because they have considered so much information, they somewhat think that 54% it makes sense, because for those who have only considered English, everybody speaks English in the United States, they are likely to state that the statement is true. So these experts are less surprised when they see the group average is 54% compared to the lay people. And because expertise is determined by how much information one has and not how uncertain one feels, that's why my algorithm identifies experts even when self-reported confidence fails. Basically, to identify experts, we shouldn't rely on one's reports of their feeling. We should somehow try to extract the amount of information they have. And that's what my algorithm is able to review through advice taking. And by the way, I also have a study 3, which is just to demonstrate that intuition I just described in a controlled experimental setting. So basically, we first create a context where self-reported confidence fails, where self-reported confidence fails to identify experts. Then we exhaustively manipulate the amount of information each subject has and examine whether advice taking correctly identifies the experts, even when self-reported confidence fails. And for the time's sake, I will skip this experiment and discuss a few points. By the way, this is a very behavioral economics thing, which is less relevant to wisdom of crowd. Okay. So in the beginning, I mentioned that there are other methods to improve wisdom of crowds. So how does my algorithm compare to theirs? So in short, my algorithm, I have pilot studies to suggest that my algorithm outperforms Pali and So 2019, published in Management Science. So their idea is that, so you provide your initial estimate to your questions, as well as an estimate of the group average. So you provide a group estimate of the group average. And then based on the two estimates from a group of subjects, you can do some structural estimations, primarily based on the distance between one's own estimate and one's estimate of the group average. So and then there are many other methods like that. I believe to some extent, Chan-Packer's method is also based on meta prediction, and it leverages the distance between how people estimate. It leverages people's estimate of the group average. And then the reason for my algorithm's superior performance is that it simply does not require complicated structural estimations based on mathematical assumptions. So if you have if the method requires a lot of mathematical assumptions, which then would inevitably introduce a lot of noise to the aggregation process, especially when we are dealing with human subjects and human cognition. To be honest, it's very difficult to correctly estimate the group average. So if we go back to the previous questions that I had, what's the world record auction price? It's very difficult. I mean, if you are perfectly Bayesian and perfectly rational, of course, you can somehow somehow correctly estimate the group average based on your private versus public signals or common versus private information. But if I just ask you, like, what's the group average of the people even in this audience, it's going to be very difficult to know what other people are thinking. And the nice thing here about my algorithm is that the group average is readily provided. All you need to think about is whether your initial estimate is better than the group average. If you think that the average of 100 people probably have accounted for more information than you, then you update more. If you think that you are probably more precise than the average of 100 subjects, then you update less. So by leveraging the relative expertise, I'm able to overweight the experts in the aggregation. And finally, to summarize my contributions, first, I propose an easy to implement algorithm to identify experts and improve wisdom of crowds. And because the algorithm is fundamentally about how do people update their beliefs and what we can learn from people's belief updating. So I have essentially provided an alternative way of thinking about the wisdom of crowds question, or thinking about how to improve the wisdom of crowds from a mathematical or statistical problem to a behavioral problem. So basically, from now on, behavioral scientists can contribute to improve wisdom of crowds by better understanding how people update their belief or make people's updating more Bayesian. And second, I lay out the rational foundation for advice taking. So to circle back to the Bayesian updating model that I mentioned in the beginning, so prior variance in Bayesian updating does not merely depend on agents' subjective confidence, but it depends on people's informativeness, how informed they are. Therefore, since advice taking reveals agents' relative informativeness, that's why my algorithm successfully identifies experts even when self-reported confidence fails. And I was told that the presentation is only 30 minutes. I might have gone over a little bit, but I think that's the end of my talk.